Well, hi everyone. It's amazing to see so many of you here today. Thank you so much for showing up on a Wednesday lunchtime. Um, Rachel very kindly introduced me. I'm Kate. I work for the National Biodiversity Data Centre on the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan. And I'm going to be talking to you about gardening for biodiversity today because of my work with the Pollinator Plan. It's going to have a slight pollinator theme. But a lot of the actions that I'll be talking about will also benefit wider biodiversity, and we have some recommendations for where you can find out more about how to help other species as well if they're not covered in this talk. But I'll do my best to cover what I can. I'm going to be talking a little bit about pollinators first of all, what they are in Ireland, the different species of pollinators and the threats they face and how we can help them in our gardens through our top 10 actions that are backed up by evidence and science from the data centre and from the Irish Pollinator Research Network. And I know that a lot of you filled in a little bit of information before you joined about what type of what sort of information you're looking for. I know we've got a real mix of people here today who have different levels of experience, maybe different types of space. There's some of you have very small gardens or maybe even just a balcony. Some of you have bigger gardens. Some of you are from community groups. So I'm hoping that there'll be something in here for everybody. But if there isn't, then we're also going to be talking about lots of other places where you can find out more, and we'll give links to those as well. And then we'll have some questions at the end. So first of all, for those of you who aren't familiar with the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, this is a framework across the island of Ireland, bringing together different sectors to create a landscape where pollinators can survive and thrive. And a large part of the work we do is creating resources for different sectors. So you can see some of them here. For those of you who are in community groups, this is a really useful guide for actions you can take in your community. All of these are free and available to download from pollinators.ie, and it's just a list of basically what I'm going to be talking about today, but tailored slightly differently to different settings, whether you're a local community or a business or a farmer, a sports club. So I suppose the reason I'm sharing this with you is don't worry about remembering everything today. I'm going to be sharing a lot of information, but I don't want you to feel overwhelmed if you're just getting started. There's loads of information out there, and the purpose of this talk is just to give you a few ideas to get started and adapt to your garden. We also have guidelines that go into a bit more detail about some of the actions I'm going to be talking about, and I'll mention those as I go along, like how to manage hedgerows or meadows. So don't worry if you don't take everything down here. There's plenty of information out there. But first of all, I'm just going to go back and talk a little bit about who our pollinators are in Ireland. And we have our bees, of course, our wild bees. I'll talk a bit more about those in a minute. And then we also have hoverflies, and then other insects like butterflies and moths also pollinate. And that pollinators play a really important role in our landscape. They help our plants reproduce, which keeps our landscape green, and pollinate a lot of our food crops as well. So they're really, really important. And in Ireland, bees are our most important pollinators, followed by hoverflies and then moths and butterflies as well. So looking then a little bit more closely at our bees, we have one native honeybee in Ireland. So this is our Irish black bee here. Usually live in hives, and they're usually kept by beekeepers. Then we've got 21 different types of bumblebee, and you might have seen some of these flying around already. They're emerging from hibernation round about now, particularly the queens you'll see coming out, and they're big, fluffy, they're quite hard to miss. And then we also have 80 solitary bees. And these are the ones that are often overlooked. And I'll talk a little bit more about them in a minute, but they're our largest group of bee in Ireland. And these bumblebees and solitary bees are what we call our wild bees because they're not domesticated by humans. So just giving you a bit more of an idea of how the variety within these groups. These are all our bumblebees. And as you can see, some of them look, a lot of them look quite different to one another. Some of them have different coloured bodies or tails. And then these are our solitary bees. So there's tons of them, and a lot of them don't actually look like bees at all, or what you'd imagine a bee to look like. They look like flies or wasps sometimes. And a lot of people don't know that solitary bees are often among the best pollinators, because unlike bumblebees and honeybees, they have evolved to carry pollen slightly differently. So if you ever see a bumblebee out foraging, this is a bumblebee here, you might notice if it's been hard at work, it's got these pollen baskets on its back legs. Don't know if you can see that. This sort of and they change colour depending on what the bee has been feeding on, which can be quite interesting. They're a really compact, efficient way of carrying pollen. They scrape them onto their back legs. Whereas a solitary bee, like this one, either makes a very loose pollen basket or it covers its hairs in pollen. So when it flies, it scatters the pollen everywhere. So you can imagine that that's not very efficient for the bee, but it's fantastic from the point of view of pollination. So that's why you might hear it said sometimes that solitary bees are fantastic pollinators, because they've just evolved in a slightly different way to the bumblebees and honeybees. So what's the problem? 1/3 of our bee species in Ireland is threatened with extinction, and that is mostly due to a loss of habitat, particularly species-rich grasslands, native meadows, decline in wildflowers that you'd find in these meadows, pests and disease, use of pesticides, and also climate change. 78% of our wild plants are pollinated by insects, and then just looking at it on a global scale, 100 crops provide about 90% of the world's food, and of these, 71 are pollinated by bees. So that really shows you how much we need these tiny little insects to support our own food production, to keep our landscape as diverse as it can be, but also I think that these pollinators deserve a landscape that can support them for their own sake. So when we're looking at what to do to help them, there's a really important first step, which is really easy to overlook, particularly if you're keen to get started, and that's protecting what's already there. So a lot of you have told us that you have maybe just moved house, you've got a new garden, you're wondering what to do to get started to make it better for biodiversity. Honestly, in the first instance, the best thing you can do is nothing and just watch and see what pops up naturally, see what's already there, because you might be surprised by what is already providing a resource for biodiversity. Where are the wildflowers? Where are the native trees and hedgerows? If you've got a small garden, where are the dandelions popping up in the cracks? They're a really important native wildflower. So just do take a bit of time to look around and see what's there. If you've got a bigger garden, are there any invasive species that might be problematic that you might need to remove? There's a lot of information on how to recognise and deal with those on invasives.ie. And think about your garden in the context of what's around it. You know, no garden is in isolation. There was a really interesting study published recently by Maynooth University about how there are 2 million gardens in Ireland, and I think they cover the equivalent of about 359,000 acres. And they could really be seen as like the new national park if we joined them up and managed them, even small parts of them, for biodiversity. So think about your garden in the context of what's around it. Where are the other gardens? What's in them? Are there any other parks? Because pollinators don't see those boundaries. They're looking at your garden in that kind of wider context. So and think about how you can join the dots between them. So a really good way of starting to do that can be just drawing a simple map of your garden. And this is a map that was done by a school in Wicklow. It doesn't need to even be as detailed as that. You can just do a quick sketch on the back of an envelope, shape of your garden. There's maybe some dandelions here. This is where the snowdrops are popping up. This is where there's a bit of ivy. I've got a dry stone wall here. Some bare earth, really important habitat for mining solitary bees. And where are the corners that are kind of a little bit forgotten about? Really, really important. Where are the areas that are a little bit messy, a little bit wild? And make it a priority to protect these areas, because chances are they're already providing some sort of service for something. And also, if you've maybe got an urban garden that doesn't have lots of green space, where are your flower pots or beds or hanging baskets? Because there's potential there as well, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. And then you might want to think about, where does the sun fall in your garden? Where's the shade? Is it north facing? Is it south facing? Is it particularly windy? Some of you told us you had had wind, a lot of wind in your gardens, or were in coastal areas. And what's it like at different times of year? So this is particularly a good thing to think about if you've just moved and you want to get started. Make time to look at your garden at different times of year and see what pops up, because there might be stuff that appears in autumn that you don't even know is there yet. And just see where the sun falls at different times of year. Really make that time to be in tune with your garden, because it will make such a big difference when it comes to taking some of these actions and choosing what's appropriate for your space. So after you've done that, one of the best things you can do if you've got a bit of grass is mow a little bit less. So don't mow, let it grow. And if you follow us on social media, you'll hear us banging on about this a lot, but it really is one of the best things you can do for pollinators and for biodiversity generally. And the reason for this is, when you reduce mowing, you are encouraging native wildflowers to come up naturally. You don't need wildflower seed mixes. I'll talk a bit more about that later. There are already seeds in the soil bank waiting for a chance to emerge. And they're really, really important for pollinators, because they have evolved alongside our native insects, and so they're perfectly adapted to give them the nectar and pollen they need. And these are flowers that are often overlooked, like dandelions, clovers, like red clover in the grass here, bird's foot trefoil, can see there as well, self-heal, all of these plants and other types of grasses as well. Really, really important for pollinators and other insects like butterflies. When you reduce mowing, and really crucially remove the grass clippings when you mow, that makes the fertility in the soil go down. And that's why it works, because wildflowers need low fertility soil in order to grow. So some of you might have taken part in No Mow May in the past. That's a really good place to start, and hopefully you've seen some results as having done that for a month, putting the lawnmower away for a month. But it is a starting point. Reducing mowing across the year is really the best way to help biodiversity. So there's a couple of ways you can do that. You could mow every 4 to 6 weeks, starting in mid-April, and that lets the first flush of dandelions appear, and that creates what we call a short flowering meadow. Or just cut once a year and create what we call a long flowering meadow, which provides food and shelter as well. In both cases, you need to remove the grass clippings after you mow, because otherwise they'll rot back into the soil, the nutrient levels will go up, and the wildflowers won't grow. And you don't have to do this all over your lawn. You can just do a patch or a strip, short flowering meadow. Maybe at the corners you could do a long flowering meadow. You can mix and match depending on what you use your garden for, what you use your space for. So just a few tips for this and a few pictures as well. So if you are maybe a bit worried about what your neighbours might think, we hear this an awful lot. People are a bit worried about their neighbours thinking that they've totally let the grass grow. You can mow paths or patterns through your meadow, so you're showing that the management's deliberate, or put up a homemade sign. Mowing a path is actually a really nice thing to do, because then you can enjoy the meadow later on, and this is a good example of where that's worked really well. Lots of clover here and a path so you can wander through and enjoy it. Remember to remove the grass clippings, and really importantly with this action, you probably won't get instant results. Every year we hear from people who've tried to reduce mowing, maybe done No Mow May and got a lot of grass in the first instance. And to be honest with you, if your lawn is used to being mown quite a lot, that's quite normal, because at first the soil fertility is going to be too high. But if you do it over time, gradually, the fertility is going to go down. You're going to get more and more beneficial grasses competing with that monoculture of grass and wildflowers as well. So our motto is always patience, not packets. So waiting, reducing mowing, rather than using wildflower seed packets, which can be problematic, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. If you want to learn a bit more about this, we have a guide on how to create and restore meadows in local communities and gardens. So this goes into a lot of detail into how you can tell what stage your meadow is at, by how many species are in it, how to use some plants like yellow rattle to encourage it along, and how to troubleshoot if you're having any issues. And just a really nice example from last year, we heard from someone in Westport who had created a short flowering meadow in his garden for a few years. And you can see here, this is the result he's had after about 3 years of doing this. And it might not look particularly bright and colourful like you see on a wildflower seed packet. That's not a native Irish meadow. This is a native Irish meadow. So you can see here the variety of the different types of grasses and plants you've got in there. You've got clovers there, dandelions, daisies, and he also got an orchid a couple of years ago as well, which is just a fantastic result. Really, really good example of how patience pays off. So after that, if you're lucky enough to have a little bit of hedgerow in your garden, one of the best things you can do is manage it for biodiversity. And that means not cutting it every year. And at this time of year, it's illegal to cut hedgerows anyway, so don't do it. But generally, if you try and avoid cutting annually and cut, if you have to cut, on a 3-year rotation instead, then that means that blossom grows, because it doesn't grow, it only grows on older wood. So making that time to cut in a 3-year rotation is really important, and let it grow in a natural shape, the shape it wants to, like an A shape rather than a neat box shape. Native hedgerow plants like hawthorn and blackthorn, they're really important because they flower earlier in the year when the bumblebees are emerging from hibernation. And they do this fantastic thing where they start to bloom in succession. So you'll notice now that some species are starting to blossom later on in the spring, some other species will start to blossom. That is the result of having evolved with our pollinators over time to provide them with nectar exactly when they emerge from hibernation. So that's why it's really important when you're choosing native hedgerow plants or trees to choose local provenance ones where you can, because locally grown native hedgerow plants will be perfectly adapted to the pollinators and biodiversity in that area. Whereas if you source them from somewhere else, say in Europe, it might be the same species, but it might flower at just a slightly different time, so it's not quite as well adapted. We've got a guideline on how to manage hedgerows for pollinators, also available on pollinators.ie, so more information on there as well. And then in a similar on a similar theme, pollinator-friendly trees, also for the same reason, native trees like willow, rowan, crabapple, and holly, really, really important. Willow in particular is a very early flowering tree, and you might notice it starting to flower around about now. And if you do, if you have a willow tree in your garden or in your local area, look at it when you're going out next, and it might start to be surrounded by bumblebees at this time of year, because it's a fantastic source of nectar and pollen. When you're choosing a native tree to plant, the 3 rules to remember are right tree, so native and local provenance, for the reasons I said before. It's perfectly suited to your area, but also because if you import trees, then it can run the risk of importing diseases as well, like ash dieback. Right space, to think about what will happen to the tree in the future. Is it going to have fruit that will drop in places that are inconvenient? Basically, you want to choose somewhere that's going to mean that your tree has a long life wherever it is. So you want to make sure that's sustainable, and the right place as well. So it can be really easy to think that planting trees everywhere is the best thing to do for biodiversity, but that's not always true. We need a mix of habitats. So if there's a space that's already good for biodiversity in another way, then avoid planting on that. So for example, if it's a species-rich grassland, you want to maybe avoid planting there because it's good in its own right. And we've got some more advice on tree planting on our website. I'm whizzing through here because I know we've not got tons of time. The next one, this is a really big one, avoid pesticides. And I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but these chemicals are really damaging to biodiversity, to human health as well. And they've been found to kill, harm, and disorientate pollinators by preventing them from getting back to their nest, either directly or indirectly by killing or poisoning their food. So part of this is changing the way we view unwanted plants like weeds or like dandelions. So dandelions, records from the National Biodiversity Data Centre has shown are the most important source of food for wild bees in Ireland, and that's been the case for the past few years. So we get more sightings of bees on dandelions than any other plant. They're really, really important. I think Plant Life UK has a statistic that eight dandelions can provide the baseline nutrition for a bumblebee for a day, or something like that. They're really, really important. And I think they're gorgeous as well. They're really beautiful when you see them start to bloom, and hopefully we will over the next few weeks. They really just bring a burst of colour into your garden. So last year we ran a survey into pesticide alternatives because it's an ongoing area of study. So we just ran a survey into what other options that people were using if they had to remove unwanted plants. So I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail into that, but there was just some interesting insights into what works and what doesn't, what works on certain surfaces compared to others. There's more information on our website, but generally our advice is avoid using them altogether unless you absolutely have to, for example, when you're trying to get rid of invasive species. So number 5 is create nesting habitat, and this is often overlooked because we love planting flowers and encouraging wildflowers, but pollinators also need somewhere to nest. And our wild bees, our bumblebees and solitary bees, don't live in hives, that's just honeybees. They nest in the base of hedgerows, in long grass, cavity nesting. Solitary bees are in dry stone walls, and also bee hotels. They're the type of bee that would use your bee hotels. And also bare earth. Mining bees nest in bare earth. So helping them can be as simple as scraping back some bare earth on sunny slopes. You want a southeast facing slope that's free draining so it's not too waterlogged. Or you could drill holes into unvarnished wood for solitary nesting bees. The important thing to remember with this is make sure to choose somewhere near a food source, because bumblebees travel only around about 1 kilometre from their nest to find food, and solitary bees only a few hundred meters. So if there isn't a food supply nearby, they're not going to nest there. And you might be able to see this. I don't know, it might be quite small. There's a bee there coming out of its nest in tusky grass. So it can be as simple as just letting some grass grow long. This next one then is I'm going to dwell a little bit on because a lot of you were asking about this pollinator-friendly planting. And we've had some nice weather at last, so I'm sure lots of you are thinking of getting out into the garden, maybe going to the garden centre, doing some planting. This is a really good action if you don't have much space, because even a pot or a window box can help. And the first thing to say is that native plants are always best for our native biodiversity, because they've evolved alongside each other, and we need to prioritise protecting them. But there are some non-native, what we call ornamental plants that can also help supply nectar and pollen. Not quite as good, but can also help. The key thing to remember is to try and choose something that will provide food from February to October. So try and have something in flower between those months, because that's the bumblebee's life cycle. Perennials are generally better than annuals. So here are some examples here. We've got lungwort, comfrey, lamb's ear. That's a lovely one actually, because the leaves are very soft, and there's a certain type of solitary bee that can card the hairs off that and uses it to line its nest. Then you've also got plants like lavender and sage. Lavender, fantastic for planting in big clumps. So if you have the space and you're able to, if you plant perennials in swathes, that will really help pollinators because they won't have far to go to find the next flower. And it also looks lovely as well. Herbs are another good option. So there's some really good herbs like chives, mint, oregano. Be a wee bit careful with mint because it can spread if it's left to its own devices. Keep it to a pot where you can. Sage, so some really nice options here. And also if you're a community, we've seen some community groups have community edible planters. So you have a community planter with some herbs in it that's great to let flower for the bees, but you can also invite the community to come along and snip away to use in your own kitchen. So this is a really nice option if you've just got a balcony and you want to grow something that you can use for yourself as well. And then some more herbs here, lavender again. marigold, lemon balm, echinacea, a few different options here. These lists are all available on our website as well. So again, don't worry about remembering these or jotting these down. Some bulbs that you might want to consider. So some of these are probably popping up now. We've seen the snowdrops already. Grape hyacinth, really good source of nectar and pollen. Again, a lot of these will be flowering early in the year, so they're providing that really crucial early source of food. Some really popular bulbs like daffodils and tulips aren't a great source of nectar and pollen. So we're not saying don't plant these, because you can do what you want in your own garden. But if you want to help biodiversity and you have some daffodils and tulips, then maybe include some pollinator-friendly species as well, like some of these ones up here. Then I'm just going to talk a little bit about advice on acid soils, because we had some questions about that. Heather is a fantastic choice if your soil is quite acidic. Again, flowers at early times of the year or sort of the off season, so provides that source of food when there's not much else around. Bugle, purple loosestrife. In coastal areas, and I know I'm going very fast because we've not got a load of time, but I'll show you where you can get all this information in a minute. Coastal areas, so you've got lamb's ear again, coneflower, autumn flowering plants that looks really beautiful as well, sea thrift, catmint. So lots of different options if you're in coastal areas or acid soils, just because we were asked specifically about those before the talk. And then we can't forget our nocturnal pollinators, our moths, who are often easy to overlook because they do most of their work while we're asleep, so we never see them. But they're really important pollinators as well. So you could consider creating a moon garden for these pollinators. Some plants that they particularly like are like honeysuckles, evening primrose, Michaelmas daisy, but some native plants as well that are really important to them, and obviously are the most important ones to encourage. And with moths as well, the important thing to remember is with moths and butterflies that they start off as caterpillars. So you want to make sure that in your garden you've got the food source for the caterpillars, which is often why butterflies and moths hit trouble, because they don't have that food source when they're in their caterpillar stage. And that will be a lot of native plants like nettles, but also woody plants, so willow. And we've got a bit more information about that in a booklet called Gardening for Butterflies, which we might pop a link to in the chat. And there's also a guide on protecting nocturnal pollinators that you can find on our website. So all of the lists that I shared with you just now are available in this guide, Top 10 Pollinator-Friendly Plants for different situations. So that goes through different types of soil, native plants, non-native plants, trees, shrubs, gardens, coastal areas. So everything you could possibly need is all in that guide, and when they flower as well, so you can plan that food source being available throughout the year. And if you just have a small space, you might find this flyer quite useful, Pots for Pollinators, so how to plant a very simple pot with pollinator-friendly species. If you have a larger space, you might want to consider creating a pollinator-friendly sensory garden. So this is also from our website. A sensory garden, we're seeing they're becoming more and more popular, particularly in schools and communities that have an area that you can set aside. And it's basically a space where you can connect with nature through the senses. So you might have tasty fruit trees. Apple trees are great for pollinators because of the blossom that grows early in the year. You might have sweet smelling plants like lavender. You might have grassy areas that you mow as a short flowering meadow. So lots of different options there if you've got the space. Although having said that, you don't need a massive amount of space to do all of this. Any of these actions can be scaled up or down depending on what you have available. Then the next few things I'm going to talk about, you need to be a little bit wary of, and some of these things might surprise you. So the first one is be careful with honeybee hives. So earlier on I spoke about our one native honeybee, the Irish black bee. It's the only native honeybee we have in Ireland. Our records are showing it's currently not in decline. Too many hives, studies are showing, can create competition for food sources with wild bees, so the bumblebees and solitary bees. If you want to get a hive as a hobby, and it can be a fantastic hobby, do get in touch with your local beekeeping association, because there's loads of really good ones all over the island that are doing fantastic work to help raise awareness about how to keep your hives healthy and all kinds of bees and protecting our native honeybee as well. And if you already have a hive, just make sure that there's plenty of food nearby for wild bees as well, so you're minimizing that competition. And the next one is be careful with wildflower seed mixes. These, all of you will be familiar with these. You can get them so easily in supermarkets, shops, online. They've got really popular, but unfortunately, studies are showing that they have been found to often contain non-native species, despite what the packet says, and they can inadvertently introduce invasive species as well. So they will not result in that all-important native meadow that we were talking about earlier, that you get when you reduce mowing. There's no substitute really for what grows naturally and for free in the ground around you. So you can't really buy that in a packet. But if you do want to use them, make sure that where possible, they're native species and of Irish origin, and keep them to your garden or to pots. Don't let them spread into the wider landscape. That's a good rule of thumb for anything non-native. Or there are ways you can collect seeds from local wildflowers in August when they drop their seeds, and that can be a wee bit fiddly, but we've got a guide on how to do that as well that you can find on our website. The next one to be a bit wary of is don't install a large bee hotel. So I mentioned these earlier. These provide habitat for cavity nesting solitary bees, and I don't know if you can see that there, but this is a bee hotel that's been in use, and you can see that the holes have been plugged up. That nest has been, the bee has laid its eggs in there, and it's blocked up the holes with leaves or mud in some cases, and then the baby bees will emerge the following spring. So if you see that, that's a good sign. It means your bee hotel's been in use. But if they're too big, it's basically, it can be a buffet for birds. They love it because it can just attract predators, and it can spread diseases as well. So we recommend trying to keep it no bigger than an average sized bird box. And we've got some more advice on how to create nesting habitat as well, just really simple activities that you can do, just drilling holes in wood or creating bee banks by scraping back bare earth. Then coming to the end now, number 10 is get involved. And I know a lot of you are already part of a community group or a tidy towns group that are taking action for pollinators. There are a lot of groups around, or even you might just have some like-minded neighbours thinking about your garden in that wider context again. So a lot of communities have run like plant swaps or knowledge swaps or seed swaps. If you're a tidy towns group, you might consider applying for the Pollinator Award. That's one of the special awards that we help administrate with the Heritage and Biodiversity officers every year. There's a €10,000 prize pot there across 8 different award categories. And the application form is basically the community guidelines I mentioned earlier. It goes through that and asks you how your community is performing on each of those actions. So that's a really good resource to refer to if you're doing that. The GAA have the Green Club scheme. We help advise on the biodiversity side of that work. So they have a toolkit online for any clubs wanting to take action for biodiversity on their sports grounds, and some really great work going on there, even like planting pollinator-friendly flowers in their club colours has become a really popular one. The green schools, so a lot of eco schools and green schools working towards their green flags. And then a couple of years ago, the Irish Catholic Bishops' Conference launched the Returning to Nature initiative, where they're asking all churches to return 30% of their grounds to nature by 2030. So there's already a lot of great work going on around that. So the reason I share this with you is because there's a lot going on. You're not on your own. You know, there's a lot of people who are trying to do similar work, and many people are starting from the beginning, not really knowing what to do first or not feeling like they have the skills. So linking up where possible is always a great way of getting started. And this is just a really nice example from Cork City. A couple of years ago, a group on Blarney Street in north of the city launched the Blarney Street Pollinator Path. And all they did is they went down the street, knocked on doors, and asked people to pick a place, mow less, and spray less. And that doesn't sound like much in the grand scheme of things, but what it did was it opened doors and started conversations. And I really cannot stress enough how important that is. You know, just having that conversation in the first instance, trying to change that stigma around dandelions and weeds, messiness, you know, just have those conversations where you can. Tracking progress. So we have an online mapping system called Actions for Pollinators. If you want to add your garden onto that, you'd be more than welcome. And we might pop the link into the chat as well. So this helps us keep track of places around the country that are being managed for pollinators. And all the dots, they're different colours because they're different types of sites. So the reds are gardens, blues are businesses, yellow is communities, I think. So schools are on there as well, sports clubs. So we want to see that filled with colourful dots, ideally. And there's also ways you can do surveys. So that helps us track pollinator numbers and biodiversity, but it can also help you see the impact of the work you're doing. So there's a really simple survey that anyone can do called a flower insect timed count. Or a fit count. And that's where you find a patch of flowers, take 10 minutes out of your day and just count and watch how many insects visit. And you don't need to identify them down to the most minute level. You can say it's a butterfly or it's a honeybee or it's a it's a whatever. So there's more information of how to do that on our website, and it's also a really nice mindful activity as well. And then if you want to really get involved, we run the Bumblebee Monitoring Scheme, which is where you walk a fixed 1 to 2 kilometre route every month between, I think it's April and October, and identify the bumblebees you see along that route. And that is really important data that helps us track the bumblebee populations. And that was actually how the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan started, because data from that scheme was showing bumblebee numbers were going down. Fit count app. Oh yes, there's an app for the fit count that's free, so you can do it on your phone if you want to as well. So look, I've covered a heck of a lot of ground there. I hope I haven't overwhelmed you. Even just doing one of these things can make a huge difference. And there's loads of further information also on our website. There's resources, there's a free course in how to identify bumblebees. This booklet is fantastic by Juanita Brown, Gardening for Biodiversity, which you can find for free online as well, which goes into all of this that I've talked about, and also how to make ponds, which I've not touched on during this talk, but there's loads of information out there about how to do that. And also, by the end of the year, we're going to release an online course for biodiversity-friendly gardening, so keep an eye out for that as well. So I hope you found something in there that's been useful when you're thinking about how to apply that to your own garden. And I might finish there and be happy to take any questions.
Perfect, Kate. We've had a few questions come in throughout the presentation. Some have kind of been answered or partly answered. So I'll just go through the ones that have been submitted from the start. And they're great questions as well. Thank you so much for submitting them. So one question to start was, can some species of birds be considered pollinators too?
In some countries, yes, but not in Ireland. No, I mean they obviously have other benefits, and that one of the things birds are fantastic for is spreading seeds, because they'd eat the berries on the trees and then do their droppings, ideally not on your washing, and spread on that seed and plant. But no, but in Ireland the pollinators are mainly wild bees, but also moths, butterflies, hoverflies, which are often overlooked as well.
But increasing resources for pollinators will in turn help birds as well and other biodiversity in gardens.
Oh yeah, definitely. And even just obviously birds will feed on some pollinators, and we don't it's all about having that balance. But if you're taking action to help pollinators, then you're going to be helping the wider ecosystem as well. Yeah. And they also, like, if you think about stuff that's in blossom, like apple trees, for example, the blossom earlier in the year will provide nectar and pollen, and then later in the year, the fruit will provide food for birds. So it's all connected.
Perfect. So the next question I partly answered, but I think it'll be great to answer this live as well if people are coming from, looking at improving biodiversity and pollinators in business parks or around their offices. So we've a car park where grass verges were originally encouraged to grow, but last year they were partially planted with a wildflower seed mix. Depending on the seed mix, I know that this isn't always ideal for pollinators. Is there a way to correct or improve this?
Just give it time, because what you'll find, and what some of you may have found with using wildflower seed mixes, is you might get a big burst of colourful blooms for the first year, and then nothing the second year, and that's because a lot of them contain non-native annuals like Californian poppies and corn cockles and cornflowers. So it could just be a waiting game and see what happens this year. You might not get such stronger growth, and then gradually over time that'll die back, and then give the native flowers a chance to come back and emerge. Yeah, so just wait and see what happens.
Much case of biodiversity, a lot of time it's just waiting, waiting to
Yeah.
see. This is great. Sarah was saying that they started No Mow May across some of their sites. But she's wondering if there's any advice how to push, or how to navigate pushback from people around the aesthetic of it, because people love a neat lawn around the businesses. So we've had a few people respond to that as well, saying it's great, like the signs help, kind of having verges. But is there anything yourself, Kate, that you could recommend? We all know it's an uphill battle sometimes when it comes to this kind of communication.
Definitely, yeah. I think there was a study done down, and I think it was Tralee, a couple of years ago, where the community there were facing that problem. I think it was and forgive me if anyone's on the call and I'm getting the details wrong, but it was the council had managed some areas in this reduced mowing, way. I think it was a short flowering meadow, and they were getting complaints from some residents that it was looking messy. And then one of the community groups down there did a door-to-door, and they knocked on doors and just did a sort of survey and asked what they felt about the reduced mowing, and then explained to them what it was for, and for the fact it was for the benefit of pollinators. Once they explained that to them, the approval for the mowing regime increased. So it was just doing that piece of raising awareness, that piece of education, that that kind of brought people more on board. And I'm not saying that's always going to work, because it's absolutely not. There's going to be some people who just don't like grass being let grow. But I guess it goes back to some people saying about signage can help explain that it's not just being abandoned, it's being done for a reason. We've got free signage templates on our website that you're welcome to download and use. Mowing even just a strip along the side can help just show that it's not been left as well, or patterns. I think it was Abbey Leaks Tidy Towns last year ran a lawn art competition for May. So when it came to mowing, they were inviting people around the town to mow patterns into their grass, as opposed to just cutting the whole lot. So that was a really nice way of making it a fun activity as well. So there's a few different ways, but it is an ongoing problem. I think it's just going to be a case of, over time, hopefully we'll get to that tipping point where enough people are understand what it's for. But it is just, I know it can be a struggle. It's just a combination, I think, of persevering, raising awareness, and also doing those surveys as well, because if you can show that there's an increase in pollinator numbers in these areas, then that can help show that it's having a real impact as well.
Perfect. Fergal asks, are there some problem grasses that strangle wider or varied growth? Just thinking of buttercups.
I think that would be a better question for one of my colleagues, but there is a type that I think that actually goes back to the wildflower seed issue. One of the problems that with the wildflower seeds is that they can accidentally introduce a species called black grass, which can be invasive. In terms of other species, I'd need to get back to you on that, but I mean, with all of these things, I think it's just about seeing what works in your space. And with the reducing mowing, you might find at first that a lot of very strong plants are kind of taking over. So this is particularly if you're doing like a long flowering meadow where you're cutting once a year. In some spaces, you might get lots of nettles or lots of thistle or dock, really, really valuable in and of themselves, particularly nettles for butterfly larvae. But if you want to create a meadow and they're getting a bit too strong, then you might need to go through a phase of digging them out or just keeping them in a certain area. It's just about trying to restore that balance.
In a similar vein of managing meadows, someone asked they're concerned about forever chemicals in soil and if it would affect the plants that they would use over time.
It's a good question. To be honest,
Yeah,
I don't
that's
know. I
fine.
mean, I know there's a lot of research still underway with that. I don't know, Rachel, whether you in your soil work
No,
have found out
I
anything about
haven't
that.
come across anything in relation to forever chemicals in soils and the impact that they would have on native flowers. Not yet, anyway. If I do, we'll definitely be sure to share it.
There's a test people can do for soil health, isn't there?
There,
Do you want to
there,
tell everyone
there
about that?
is. I need to double check the name of it. I think is it called Seagrass. So if you go on to, it's actually Chagas that would have a lot of information about soil, particularly because they do a lot around agriculture and soil health. I need to double check it. If I can find the link, I will. But it's actually very simple system that you can do where you basically dig up a block and you look at the different layers of soil and you can indicate soil health. Maybe if someone from Chagas is here and would be able to pop in an answer, that would be great. If not, I'll try to find the resource and pop that into the chat as well, looking at soil health. I'm just wary of time and trying to get through some of the questions. So have you any tips for starting a garden from bare soil? I suppose, again, a lot of these questions are around seed mix, and we're always saying maybe kind of more natural ways of doing it. But just for tips on how to get started.
Yeah, and I know if particularly if you've just moved into a new build, you might have a garden that's made just from soil, say, and you really are starting from a blank canvas. So I guess there's no harm in just still doing that bit of waiting and seeing what comes up naturally, because you never know. But after that, if you can, try and source some local seeds. So if you link in with your biodiversity officers, they might be able to advise you. So almost every local authority in Ireland now has a biodiversity officer. Some of them have more than one, and they might be able to advise on like local community groups that have done seed harvesting with local populations. I think there's a list of them available on the Heritage Council website and their contact details. Other than that, if you want beds or pots, then you can choose some of those pollinator-friendly varieties that I spoke about earlier. But again, if it's a new garden that you're just getting used to, then do go and do that. Take that time to just see where the light's falling. Is it shady? What kind, is it an acid soil? Is it an alkaline soil? Look around and see what's growing naturally as well in the area, what trees and shrubs are thriving, and then kind of go from there. So do see what pops up, but if you're finding that it's totally bare, then yeah, explore those other options as well. But I just to say that with anything non-native, do keep it in your garden. Don't let it spread into the wider landscape.
Perfect. And I see some people have put some links into the chat around how to test your soil, looking at soil health and biodiversity as well. So thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it. Also love to see this. David was saying he wants to put on a biodiversity talk at work during Biodiversity Day in May. So he's asked if we can advise on any sites or sources that can be used for the research. I suppose hopefully we've given plenty of information today and plenty links. It might actually be too much, I don't know, but trying to cover many different aspects. But Kate, is there anything in particular that you would recommend?
For talks, so there are a couple of pre-recorded talks that you can use on our website. we as the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, there's only about 3 or 4 of us, so unfortunately we can't go out and give talks in person. But again, link in with your biodiversity officer, because they may well be able to recommend somebody locally who can come and give a talk, and also talk about biodiversity at the local level.
Perfect, thank you. Emily said, I see concerns online about pesticide use in garden centre plants. Is that something I should worry about?
Yeah, we'd always recommend, if you're sourcing plants from a garden centre, even ones that are labelled bee friendly, to ask if they've been treated with chemicals, because a lot of them have, and it's an ongoing issue. It's all you can do is ask the question and try and encourage that demand for organically treated plants. But just make sure when you bring it home, if you're bringing something home that's organic, don't treat it with any chemicals or pesticides.
So the next question might be more suited for our next webinar on the 7th of May. We'll actually be running one on invasive species. But nevertheless, Mary asked, if three-cornered leek, winter heliotrope or other shrubby invasive species is in an area, is it best to remove and replant and replace with something like willow if it's near a woodland?
Yeah, that would be a bit out of my area of expertise. That we have a good few members of staff now working on the invasive side of things. I don't know if have we popped the link to the invasives.ie in the chat already?
I'll pop it in with the link to the webinar as well.
Yeah, there's loads of information in there, and the webinar. When's that next webinar, Rachel?
The 7th of May, so it's actually just the week before invasive species. So it's kind of a nice introduction to invasives in Ireland.
They'll have all the information you need on how to deal with different invasives.
So the next question is a bit out of pollinators, but is related to plants. I'll actually pop in a few links as well, because we got a few queries beforehand about how to create ponds for biodiversity in gardens. So what are the best plants to surround a micro pond? Is shade essential? Again, I'll just throw in some resources that are coming from Wildlife Trust and other organisations that would have a bit more information on these.
And also, just to add, that guide that I shared with you earlier, top 10 pollinator-friendly plants, there's a page in there on wetland plants that are also pollinator-friendly. And also, like, if you're wanting a pond and you only have a tiny, a small garden, even like a tiny little bucket can make a pond. You don't need a massive amount of space. Just a little water source can make a big difference, or even like an old bird bath. There are lots of options there. So those resources will tell you more about that.
Perfect. And also, could you just explain the benefits of nettles?
Yeah, nettles are particularly valuable for many native caterpillars. So the thing with a lot of butterflies and caterpillar, their larvae, is that they're very picky in terms of what they eat. So they will only feed on, I think some of them only feed on plants like nettles and native plants. So if there aren't nettles around, then the caterpillar have nothing to feed on, and then the butterflies aren't going to emerge, obviously. So really, really important to encourage those where we can. Like I said, if you want to create a meadow, then they can kind of take over and dominate a wee bit. So just if you're wanting to create that meadow space, then that's just something to be aware of. But they are really important for our native butterflies and moths. So if you can encourage little patches of them in a safe part of your garden, then that's definitely worth doing.
I'm just aware of time. We only have enough time for maybe 1 or 2 questions that are left. So just having a look. What do you do with briars when they start to take over?
Yeah, but like brambles and like that kind of, I mean, they're valuable in and of themselves, like if you're able to give them space in your garden, then do, because a lot of bramble, the blossom is really valuable for pollinators. And in fact, I don't, for those of you who were here at the start of the talk, I was talking about the pollen baskets on bumblebee legs. If you look at a bumblebee foraging on a bramble flower, it's actually this beautiful, like pearly, purpley creamy color because it's been foraging on the bramble flower. So it's a really good example of how that's actually a valuable native plant in of itself. If it's getting too much in your space, then I mean, as with all of these actions, it's up to you what you want to do in your own garden. So you may find that you need to cut back in places, but like with other plants like ivy as well, if you can give them space, then do, because they are valuable.
Fantastic. And I think maybe this probably will be the last question, just to make sure that we finish up at 1 o'clock. Are cut grass heaps good or bad? Could be either.
They're like piles of grass clippings.
Yes.
I mean, I wouldn't say to everyone to rush out and make them. I mean, it's important to remove grass clippings when you're making a meadow. And what we're finding is that if people have a particularly large lawn, or communities who are trying to do this on large areas, or councils even, one of the problems that they're facing is what to do with the grass clippings, which I know is an ongoing problem. You want to try and avoid them in places where you want the soil fertility to go down. So that's why we don't advise leaving grass on your lawn after you've cut it. I mean, like with anything else, if there's an appropriate space in your garden to leave it, then do. We don't want to be dumping them in the wider landscape. There might be a community composter that you can contribute to if you haven't got the space to store it. But yeah, that's actually, if you look in the creating and restoring meadows in local communities and gardens, there's a section there on composting, which should give more advice around that.
Perfect. Thanks, Kate. And that actually brings us up to 1 o'clock, bang on time. I'm really sorry that we couldn't get through everyone's questions. Hopefully a lot of them would have been answered through the presentation or by answering other questions. Just to say that this is being recorded and it will be shared. It will be going up on our YouTube channel in the coming weeks, so just keep an eye on that. Well, thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you again on the 7th of May for our invasive species webinar. And we actually have some in-person workshops as well spread throughout the year. So I'll put a link in the chat for that as well. But thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely day. Bye.